Great, Jim, we may start.
Welcome, everybody. I would like to talk briefly about the use of L1 in the L2 classroom, based on my personal experiences and preferences. I'd like to make a few comments, first of all, about our first language, our native tongue. This is inseparable from our ego, identity, and intelligence. You might say our native tongue is the legs that bear you. Your native tongue is a primary instrument of self-expression, whether internalized, what you say or think to yourself, or externalized, spoken out loud to an audience, private or public. Our own language is wedded to our nature, our humanity, imagination, creativity, and our greatest aid in reaching goals and challenges. It's our most valuable and versatile tool. In times of challenge or stress, uncertainty or threat, our mother tongue is the last thing we want to give up or surrender. And let's be honest, when is one more in need of one's mother tongue than and all the facilities and faculties that it provides than in the second language classroom? And I say that as a very, very poor second foreign language learner. So let L1 play its part to build L2, allow them to interconnect, interact for the benefit of both partners, so that they may enhance each other and work together. Not least, this use of L1 in the L2 classroom shows mutual respect for both languages. Now let's move on to a specific point now. You see here on this slide, we've got a rather wise, I think, observation that a nice choice of word there, judicious use of L1 can facilitate a reduction in cognitive overload and learner anxiety. So this is particularly true of students who have a low level of L2, and I think this can apply whether it's in a class that is obligatory or is voluntarily joined. And you'll see the next point made there about explanation of complex terminology, concepts, grammatical structures. I had personal experience of this, particularly when I was teaching a specialized technical course for law students who had not had a thorough education in English. They'd not been trained to use English in the context of their specialism. And as it says there, this aiding the creation of a relaxed classroom environment is such an essential thing. And now to the next point. The importance of students feeling they are able to express themselves. This gives them confidence, it gives them encouragement, and if they have a low level of L2 proficiency, as it says here, this can well be restraining and actually inhibit self-expression and certainly accuracy of self-expression. And I think we have another point that relates to this coming next. Yes, this sense of security that is so essential for students to express themselves, and also the fact that teachers can then understand more clearly what has been learned and also what remains to be taught, as it says. And no less, that one can identify the students that need extra or further assistance. And we may go on now. Again, the phrase improved classroom dynamics. Again, we come back to this sense of security and the learner being able to use their language, their own language with confidence to express lived, justify real experiences, which they can actually express accurately to themselves, to the class. And now I think we have one more in the same vein. Yes, this comes back to what I referred to at the beginning, teaching of technical terms, particularly in my experience was with legal language. This was greatly facilitated by L1 translation using a translate facility like Google Translate, where you can actually have the voice of the L1 language saying the terms, and you also have a written language translation. This gives a much more secure base to the language learner, and then you can explain it both in English and in L2. Sorry, you can explain it both in L1 and in L2 with further use of the translate facility if needed. Now we're going to move on to some images. This is something that I believe greatly helps build confidence in students, especially if they're allowed to use L1 when responding to something that's put in front of them. And in my experience, nothing gets a fuller response than images rather than pieces of text on the whole, if they're carefully chosen. Let's look at the first image. Now here is a picture taken by a well-known photographer. This is not my picture at all. It's taken in Gaza in Palestine, and as we know the Chinese expression, a picture speaks 10,000 words, and I think this picture exemplifies the value of an image. Now you imagine you respond to this image. You have the boy, looks like a youngish boy, what we can see of him, pushing one way and the donkey pushing the other, and neither getting anywhere, basically. It's a sort of stalemate. So this is exactly the sort of image that it doesn't matter what your mother tongue is, internally you respond to this picture. It speaks perhaps 10 million words, symbolic of so many different human situations. So when the student looks at this, I think it's fairest, if their L2 language is very limited, to allow them to express their response, their reaction in their own language, and then you can translate it. You can ask the class to help you translate it into L2. Let's have the next image, please. Right, here we have a picture. Again, this actually is a picture I did, and a drawing I did for my daughter. She asked me to do a drawing of her with her best friend, our daughter Eleanor, with her best friend, Beste. So I thought I'd try and do something a bit different, and I decided to mount them on a pony, or it might even be a small horse, but I think a pony basically. And then asking students to respond to this sort of picture, testing their descriptive skills, not just their emotional response or intellectual response, but testing their descriptive skills. What can you see in the picture? How does the picture make you feel? Etc. And you tend to get a much more dynamic, spontaneous, and accurate response if you allow the students, if they can't express it in L2, to allow them to do it in L1, and then you can translate it using the stronger members in the class and also using a translate facility like Google Translate. And students can also write on the board, not only speak, and they can write translations on the board, the better students. Let's move on to the next slide. Right, here we have a picture of a javelin thrower. It's quite a dynamic picture, I think. Again, this makes quite a striking impression, I think, on the viewer, on the observer. And again, this sort of image is excellent for testing students' descriptive skills, which you don't want to be inhibited by their fear of making mistakes or not being able to say what they mean or what they think. And again, you can ask for an emotional response, and then you can translate it. Now, let's move on to the next image. Here we have another picture of a javelin thrower. Again, you can then ask the students to describe what they say, what they see, describe how they feel about it, and then you can ask them, for example, to compare the two and ask them what is different in this slide to the picture that came previously. You can say, what do they have in common? In what ways are they different? And then you can actually switch tense. You can say, what did you see in picture A, javelin thrower A? And you can ask them, what is similar in picture A, we're looking at now, to picture B, and what is different? So asking them to make critical observational comment. Again, they may struggle to do this in L2, but if they can do it successfully in L1, again, this can be translated. And then you can ask them actually to summarize the similarities and the differences. Obviously, there's a slight difference, certainly a difference in medium, one drawn with a computer mouse through the paint program, and the other drawn with a pencil. This one with the computer mouse through the paint program, drawn by hand, and this one drawn with pencil. We're just going to look at, I think there's one or two more images in the pipeline. Let's go on. I think this is the last one. Here you have a different sort of picture, if you like. It's a slightly whimsical, perhaps a bit unusual. It's a sketch of a lady, and you can ask the students what they see in the picture, what's going on in the picture, to describe it again, and express their emotions, their feelings about the picture. And you can also invite them to ask questions about the picture. When was it done, or why was it done? What do you know about this picture, etc. So I think that brings us close to the end. So I'd just like to move on now to talk about this use of technical terminology in the classroom. I can't emphasize too strongly, you can have a class of extremely intelligent, motivated students who in their faculty are not taught in English, but they've volunteered or they've been obliged to take an English course, for example, as we've had for the last 5 or 6 years at the university, an obligatory course for law students, English for law, where a lot of very complicated technical terms are used. And it's often been essential in order to satisfactorily convey the meaning of these terms to the students in English, it's often been essential, in my opinion, to allow them to have an L1 translation, both written and oral. And from that building block, if you like, where they grasp what the meaning is, obviously sometimes the language used is very different. And I'll give an interesting example to close with. I put a complicated legal term in English on the Google Translate. I then translate. We heard it orally and we heard it. We saw it written, and then we're going to put it into L1, into Turkish. And when I turned on the Google Translate, I didn't realize that I'd actually switched languages for the L1. The L2 I popped in English, we heard it in English, we saw it written in English, and when it came to the L2 translation, oral and written, it was in Spanish. Somehow I'd flipped it to Spanish from Turkish, and what was quite extraordinary was a number of the students were studying Spanish, and when they saw the Spanish, they felt quite comfortable because the roots of the words in English and in Spanish were the same Latin words. So suddenly this use of L2 or L3, whatever you want to call it, actually provided a bridge to the L1 translation. So that really is all I've got to say. The great thing in the classroom is to connect, to build confidence and enthusiasm, and anything that enhances student participation, student understanding, and student progress, I think is valid. And L1 can be a big help. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that may be of some interest to you. And again, I come back to the use of images in the classroom. I think it's a great way to stimulate students and let them show their mettle, if you like. Thank you very much.